Kia ora, I'm Erin J. Doyle. Welcome to my channel. In my last video I was talking about how I had submitted my Camino story to a New Zealand publisher that doesn't require an agent, and whilst I was waiting to hear back from them I was preparing to move on to my next project and trying to figure out which one that would be. I do have a small and unexciting update. My book has been rejected, but that's fine. Like, that's just the beginning of racking up the numbers of rejections that one expects to rack up before hopefully eventual success. I am, however, slightly confused as to whether this is a form rejection or not. Like, it could be, like, it's not super specific, but it seems very, very nice. Like, it doesn't read as if it's the copy-paste, "Thanks for sending us your book that we haven't bothered to read and we don't know what it's called. Please don't contact us again, love from." Like, this is... they have specified the name of my book in the email and they've said, despite its strengths, it's not a right fit for our current list. The not a right fit thing is pretty standard, I think, like, as a rejection reason, because it's nicely vague and it's not actually your work sucks and we hope to never hear from you again. It's just like, oh no, it's not a good fit for us. So like, that makes me think it's a form rejection, but saying like despite its strengths seems very nice. And then the thing that actually makes me go, is this a form rejection? Because like, I'm not sure. Like, I want to know if the other people have had this experience. They have suggested to other publishers I should send it to. I'm like, either that is their form rejection and they just wholesale recommend everyone they don't want and they think sucks, like takes their work to the competitor publisher just to mess with that publisher, but like, maybe this is genuine, we have read your thing and yes it has its strengths, not our cup of tea, but you know, that guy might like it. Like, I want to know, people who have received form rejections, can you tell me if that's normal? Because I, like, not because it really matters, because either way I'm rejected, but I just want to know. Anyway, so I guess now I have to decide if I'm sending it to those publishers that were recommended, or if I'm going on to the original plan B of now querying UK agents because I'm about to move to the UK. That wasn't going to be a question up until I got that email, and now I'm like, because like, they've recommended a pretty massive publisher, like a bigger than them publisher, and I'm like, do you say that to everyone, or do you think I'm worth that big time publisher's attention? It seems like surely not, because if I was worth the big time publisher's attention, surely I would have won yours. But anyway, I'm distracting myself. The point is, I should say the point of this video is supposed to be the new project, because I can't do anything more on the Camino story, like it's written. So, prior to getting that email, I had been focusing very much on just the new project. I think in my last video I made it clear, I think, that I was moving on to writing an isekai. Hang on a second, horribly itchy! A maintenance person came in to my house a few days ago and made a hole in the wall, and then he came in and fixed the hole in the wall like 2 days later, and now I'm getting itchy bites on my ankles. And I'm blaming him. I have decided that he wore dirty shoes into my house, which is culturally offensive in this country to wear shoes inside at all. And I've decided he did that, and that he brought in like flea eggs or something that have now hatched and are infesting my life. Anyway, so I'll have to do something about that. Moving on to the isekai project, I realised while I was editing my last video that I never explained what an isekai is, and I don't know how many people would know that. Like, if you're not a fantasy reader, does that word mean anything to you? Especially given it's not an English word. So, just in case, like, hopefully everyone's down and I'm explaining, you know, things unnecessarily, but just in case, an isekai is a story where a person travels from their world to a new world and has adventures. So this could be, or is most typically, a person from our world gets transported into a fantasy world, gets magic, becomes super powerful, has great adventures, saves the day. Sometimes they are already in a fantasy world and they just go to a different fantasy world. That's kind of it. There's lots of different types of stories within this. Like there are kind of cozy fantasy versions, high fantasy versions, super violent versions, kind of love story, sappy versions. It's basically anything wherein the character travels from one world to another, and the way in which they travel also changes quite a lot. I'm waving my hands a lot. I feel like I need to sit on them. I'm obviously not now sitting on them. So they could travel from one world to the other through like a magical doorway they find. Perhaps they're sucked into some kind of magical portal. It could be that they've died and be reincarnated. I'm sure there is another option there that I can't think of, but one way or another they magically go from, or spiritually I guess, reincarnation isn't technically magic, but they go from one world to another and have some kind of adventure. So obviously that's what I'm gonna write. So with having written my Camino story, those of you who've been around for a long time will know that I had a spreadsheet where I was tracking all the events and what happened in each chapter, and I was doing that as I wrote it, not in advance. And partly that was because I was a discovery writer moving into planning, but it was also because no, I think that was 100% of the reason. Yeah, anyway, that was easy to do for that project because the story is drawn from my experiences of walking the Camino, and on the Camino you walk a set path, and you can kind of break it down into days really easily, so that's what I ended up doing. I had a chapter per day that the character was walking, and that made it very easy for me to kind of see the shape of it from the beginning while I was creating that spreadsheet, and then just kind of shifting events into different days to make sure that no day was kind of empty, because obviously like story-worthy events don't happen every day. So that's where that spreadsheet kind of came from. But I think I can use that spreadsheet as a beginning point instead of a halfway through, just so I can visually assess what I've done thing, which is what it was originally. So I decided to create a spreadsheet, and because every like course or advice thing that I've ever seen for writing a book says like make a list of how many chapters you want and decide what's going to happen in each chapter, and that's what I did. So I had a column for the chapter, and then I had a column for the key event in that chapter. Do I need to draw the curtains? Yeah. And then I had a third column for, and I'm going to keep this deliberately vague, things that the main character acquires in that chapter. So that's where I started off with, and I had 21 chapters with key events. It wasn't super robust. It was like, you know, chapter 1, character having a normal life, chapter 2, character arrives in fantasy world, kind of level of detail. And then the plan was to obviously start bulking that out a little bit. So I went to a second version where I still had the same chapters and key events, and then I wanted to have what each character was doing in those chapters. So I created a column per key character, and then for that chapter I wrote what they were doing. So if the character didn't appear in that chapter, obviously I left their cell blank. So it did end up creating a very empty spreadsheet because a lot of the characters aren't introduced until later in the story. But I wanted to see a little bit more detail, and I kind of figured the big key event isn't the whole story within a chapter, so I might have like the key event is the ball, and then like this character shows up late, this character sneaks off with so and so, this character gets into a fight with such and such, or whatever, just so I could see who was doing what and just get that little bit of extra detail to go with those key, this is the point of the chapter points. I very quickly abandoned that and moved on to version 3, where I ditched the chapter structure altogether because I was finding it just a little bit constraining to be working within less what's happening in the story and more what's happening in these units of time. Perhaps that works for others, but I definitely found it just, yeah, like I found it like a barrier to progress. So I got rid of that column and I just went with key events, and I was able to jump a little bit in the number of key events from 21 up to 142 just by getting rid of that chapter constraint. It also meant that I could, instead of just having this is the key event in this chapter, I could go this happens, then this happens, and that causes this to happen, and I can group those key events into chapters later, and I don't have to worry about when the breaks in the story are between one chapter and another, where I could just, here is everything in a list. I still had the columns for the characters at this point. Well, that's a spoiler for what happens next. So here I stopped looking at the actions of the characters in each chapter or in association with each key event, and I treated these columns independently of that key event column, and I just wrote down what each character's story is. This was also abandoned. I went on to another version. This time, again, I didn't have those chapter constraints, and I took the character information and I started slotting it into the key events column. So instead of just having, okay, this character does this overall, I could see where that character's doing things within the structure of the story. This didn't greatly increase my bullet points because I think I kind of started doing it before I abandoned version 3. So version 4 only has 148 points compared to 142 for the previous version. Then I brought in a column for questions to consider. So this one is where there is a specific event happening in the story. Don't know what chapter it goes in, but here it is in the spreadsheet. But maybe there's an extra thing I need to consider. Like, okay, in this point a character like gets a letter. Perhaps by this point in the story I should be considering how common literacy is within this fantasy world. Are people going to be surprised that the character can read? Or, you know, maybe the letter itself had to be written by a scribe, and so the person had to like pay for that or whatever. So yeah, I've just got these little extra niggly things that I have to fix or expand on or work in somewhere to make sure that those points are nicely filled out, I guess, and make sense within the wider world build. And at the moment I'm sitting on 37 questions that I have to answer, which feels like a lot, but some of them are really little. Like I said, how common is the ability to read and write in this world? Yes, that has some world building consequences, but not like massive ones. So the fact that there's a lot of those little decisions doesn't feel intimidating to me. The other column I have isn't quite as key event orientated. It's just shapeless sort of list of things that I want to include somewhere, and I don't know where. I don't know how they might, you know, work in with different key events or the questions that I have to consider. It's just like, you know, this is a common trope of this genre, it'd be neat if I could include it, so I'll just make a list of those things. And I have 41 of them, which is too many. So I do need to tackle that set of ideas, but basically what I'm doing is referring back to that set of ideas periodically and seeing if any of those help me fill in the gaps within the key events, because what I've found is that I've had to leave gaps in the spreadsheet, like just a cell or two where I'm like, okay, the character is here and then they're going to end up here, something has to go in the middle, and I've just left an empty cell and I've made it a different colour so I can easily spot that it's still waiting some kind of plot point to go in that space. So I feel like this version of the spreadsheet It doesn't have the some of the information that the previous versions have, like what the characters are acquiring, but I've just built that information into the key events itself, so it doesn't need to be in its own column. So those are my like plot spreadsheets and the different versions thereof, and then I have a couple of additional things that I wanted to keep separate from plot, at least for now. So I have a spreadsheet for just kind of basic character description, demographic-y stuff like age, appearance, what they, I guess, archetypes they fit into, like what their personality is, that kind of basic stuff. And then I have a final workbook within the spreadsheet, which is just a comparison of the worlds. And this is very, very minor, like this needs some work, but I think at the moment some of it is sort of floating around in my head and I'm not ready to like put it on paper yet. But it's basically just a list of original world versus new world. So where there is a really strong contrast, I can just chuck that in. Obviously, in most cases, it's going to be pretty obvious. My character is from our world, so that doesn't really need to have a list of descriptions to me. But where there is something that's really starkly different, I've put that in the list so I can talk about it. So it might be like, say, there is an extra moon in the fantasy world, so I've just made a note of that in that spreadsheet. So that's all I've kind of gotten up to at the moment. I think at the moment I still want to keep working on this list. I don't feel like I'm quite ready to start writing yet because I've got so many of those unresolved questions, and I think what I need to do is go through that list and highlight the ones which really need to be resolved before I start, because some of those will have obviously wider ranging effects than just that one little key event in the story that I've listed them alongside. And then maybe I want to go through the list of like ideas to add and maybe prioritize them, because some of them are just like, you know, this might be neat, but I don't really have a place for it. I don't know how important it would be, how I'd work it in. Maybe it would be neat, but meh, like it wouldn't change the story. Whereas other things might be like, you know what, this is really cool. I don't know where it's going to go, but I really want it. And that might help me kind of figure out when I'm taking stuff from that list and putting it into the key events. It'll help me go, aha, the one at the top of the list, that one needs to go in, instead of having to read the whole list every time and then do some thinking and then forget what I've already read because that list is long. Yep, so that's what I'm doing. And now I'm also doing that whilst considering my next step with my Camino story. So I don't think it is now the time to go back and do any kind of revisions. Like, I'm actually really happy with it as it is. And it's not like it's been rejected many times and now I have to really think about how it could be improved. Like, one rejection isn't that big of a deal. But yeah, now I have to decide, do I submit to the other two publishers they suggested, or do I just go hard for the Querying UK agents option? If I go the UK agents option, obviously there's a whole bunch of work there because I've got to start like researching those agents, and as we know, there's some big life changes on the go right now, and I'm pretty sure my first sort of significant milestone check-in for my PhD is at the 4-month mark, which is not that far away. Admittedly, I don't start until October, but that's still early next year that I'll have that check-in, and I haven't discussed this with my supervisor yet, but based on my experience working in academia, I believe that I will have to be able to present a literature review and or a proposal for the research. So that's quite a lot of work, and obviously like, oh no, don't screw it up right at the beginning. Like I think I'll be feeling a lot of pressure to get that done. And it's sort of sitting at a computer reading academic-y work. And is that something that I want to couple with in my downtime writing a fantasy, or in my downtime researching and querying agents? And the particular interest in this being in 4 months thing is that one of the agents, the bigger agent, not agent, publishers, the bigger of the publishers that was recommended has a 4-month turnaround time. So I could just go, you know what, less effort for now and ship it off to the other New Zealand publisher that was suggested, and then next year get that thesis sort of milestone behind me before I worry about UK agents. Oh, this is going to be hard to follow, my bad. The other thing I could do is use that period to start looking at that research of the agents and what they do and rah. I have got a little bit of a list started, but not enough to like start sending off anything. So I feel like maybe if I just submit it, maybe it gets accepted. Not statistically likely, don't get excited. But if it doesn't get accepted, then that gives me time to do that additional research and start the querying process, but also have my book on submission at the same time. I don't know if that makes sense. To me it does. Let me know if I need to explain better. So yeah, that's where I'm up to. Revising what I thought plan B was for my Camino story submission, and continuing to stare at my spreadsheet. So tempted to just start writing, but I do think I need to get a couple of those questions squared away first. Yep. And of course I have to do all of this whilst packing and moving to another country and finishing up all my existing projects at my current job, because I don't want them contacting me going, can you write this, that or the other thing, where did you put this, hey by the way we know this was never your job in any context, but we have been making you do it for the last 8 years and now we have to let somebody else do it and we have no idea what you were actually doing, can you let us know? I don't want to have any of those conversations whilst I'm doing my PhD, so I need to like really nicely wrap up everything in New Zealand before I go. So what a time to be taking on additional projects. That's going to be everything for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe. And for those of you who have received form rejections, do let me know down below if you got suggestions for other publishers that you could send it to. Because, yeah, like, I guess it makes no difference. I'm just curious. And, yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!